back, everyone. Now, there's a lot of talk about going green. What's less talked about is what this would mean in terms of geopolitics. To get a better sense of this and what it would mean for China especially, we've invited to speak with us Power the Future founder Daniel Turner. Let's jump into that now. Daniel Turner, it's great having you on Crossroads.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I understand you've written this paper talking about green energy policy, and you've touched on something a lot of people don't talk about, which is that, yes, people want green energy, yes, they want environmental protection, but the way the green industry is structured right now, if we went pure green energy, it would hand it to China and really mean China controls the environmental standards, which are pretty terrible in China. So I guess just tell us your assessment on this, because this is something not a lot of people talk about.
No, they don't, I'm glad we're talking. I'm really grateful we're talking about it. China is the world's largest polluter on several levels. They're the world's largest ocean polluter in terms of dumping plastics and toxics into the ocean. They're the world's largest CO2 emitter. And China, if you recall, even in the Paris Climate Accords, Paris never agreed to anything. They agreed to a framework for a future date. There's no UN inspectors in China. There are no green groups like the Sierra Club or Center for Biological Diversity. None of their activists are in China. And so China is exempt from a lot of the rigorous environmental standards that the United States, for example, puts itself under.
So Dan, you were talking about how environmental policy, people of course do it in good faith. A lot of people who believe in environmental policy legitimately believe that they're doing it to benefit the environment, that green energy is the future, that doing so is going to be better for the environment than oil, coal, natural gas, you name it. But they don't factor in the whole picture, which is who controls it, one, what does it mean when they control it, what happens when parts break down? Because there's a whole manufacturing process, there's an entire process for placing parts, and all those processes also devour energy in different forms. Now, in your assessment, passes all these energy policies, there's sanctions on using oil and gas and so on. What happens? What happens with the energy markets? What does this mean for us?
In the immediate, the effects will be really devastating because we will see a huge spike in the price of oil and gas. Natural gas for home heating especially, it's a bad time as we approach winter for that to go up. But gas prices have been incredibly low during the entire Trump administration. And the reason why is just basic supply and demand. And our supply has been enormous, so much so that we are exporting oil to other countries. When we start cutting off our supply and our demand stays the same, because our demand is going nowhere, we still consume as much gas as we normally, as much oil as we normally would. What's going to happen is the prices are going to skyrocket, and that hurts the lower income people way more than anybody else. So right off the bat on pricing, we will feel it. But oil goes into a lot more than just our cars. There are hundreds of thousands, innumerable products that are made from oil. So take, for example, just one simple one, fertilizer and pesticides are all an oil product, right? What will happen to crop prices? What will happen to food prices when those prices begin to skyrocket? So the trickle-down effect is going to be enormous. People who say we're going to get rid of fossil fuels really have no idea what fossil fuels actually do.
And there's a couple other points on this. One is that Trump wanted to make the United States a oil producer. He wants us to become a power when it comes to the oil industry. Not something that was seen as even a possibility under the Obama administration. This was not even seen as something that the U.S. could possibly do by opening up all the different stores in the U.S. and using these. But we're looking at a few other factors, which again is China. On one point, actually, big story we're going to have coming up pretty soon on this channel, is how the Chinese Communist Party has gained influence to a large extent, at least a third of ownership, over the oil industry in Guyana. And Guyana recently discovered very large stores of offshore fuel and is really set to become one of the major players in the world with the fuel industry. China has big control over that. Meaning that if the U.S. isn't playing this game, who's going to control the global oil industry? It's going to be Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and China? Or is the U.S. going to be a big player on this as well? And what happens if the U.S. starts restricting these things on U.S. soil? And I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, we'll have alternative energy. We're going to be switching to that. What would you say to people who have that understanding?
Then, like I said, they don't understand what fossil fuels are made for or what they go into. So, absolutely, China is hugely desperate for oil reserves. They are the number one largest oil importer. They don't have a lot of oil naturally within China, so they have to find it in other places. America has the providence, you could say, the blessing that we have tremendous oil reserves. It gives us tremendous amount of leverage on the world stage. China doesn't have that. So it behooves China to move America to something where they have leverage. 70% of the green technology is manufactured in China. China would love for America to give up its oil and buy their product. It puts them in a much greater position of international strength. But on the world stage, you're absolutely right. This is a great geopolitical battle, and it's been one for 60, 70 years now, right? I mean, my whole life I've heard about the Straits of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, the Middle East. The main reason why it has been such a hotbed of activity, usually violent activity, is because it has controlled the world's oil supply. But it doesn't anymore. We don't need Middle East oil anymore. So we can enter into Middle East negotiations, conversations from a position of strength. Why would we want to cede that under a Biden-Harris administration and give China that position of strength? So fossil fuels are way more than just what's in our car, what's in our home heating. It is the products that we use. It is our livelihood, our quality of life. But it's also a huge geopolitical piece in this very complicated chessboard. I fear what would happen under a Biden-Harris administration if we were to give up this tremendous position of leverage that we have right now by giving up our energy dominance and our energy independence.
Well, it's interesting because from my perspective, of course, I've been reporting on China's Communist Party since about 2008. And so when I look at politics, I don't look at it just as U.S. politics. And I know for a lot of people, they don't consider the geopolitics of things they might care about. Yes, actually, I would say the oil industries have a lot of issues with them. Energy industries overall. We can look, for example, at the Iraq War and, Bush, Cheney, and Halliburton. Halliburton got the contracts. Cheney was involved in a lot of that. We can look at how Russia, for example, uses the control of natural gas as a form of control over a lot of Europe. In fact, that was one of the big national security warnings the Obama administration was getting when the Clinton administration, Hillary Clinton, who was at the time state secretary, was negotiating things through Bill Clinton around the whole Uranium One scandal. We can look, for example, at other issues like this. Chinese Communist Party, for example, going to different countries, including the UK, and looking to build atomic energy plants, nuclear plants. Oil, gas, nuclear energy, even clean energy. For a lot of countries, they regard this as one of the main systems of power, because if you control the energy of a country, you control them to a large extent. And people don't often think about the geopolitics of this in the influence game when it comes to this. And when it comes to China, again, great green energy. Who controls the green energy market? What do you say with this?
Yeah, that's a great point that you're raising. In the early 90s, the then premier of China, Deng Xiaoping, said something which was really very professorial or prophetic, excuse me. He said the Middle East has oil, but China has rare earths. And rare earths are those elements that are found in nature. They're found in small quantities along with other mining. And they are essential for all modern technology. So your smartphone, your flat screen TV, but all aerospace, modern defense weaponry uses a lot of these rare earth elements, but also all green technology, solar panels, wind turbines, electric car vehicles, and lithium ion batteries. So back in the early 90s, Deng Xiaoping realized that China was in the same position that the Middle East would be in, of a position of tremendous power over the world market. China just a few years ago shut down their rare earth exports to Japan in a trade dispute because they realized Japan is dependent on them for rare earth elements. Why would China continue to trade rare earth elements with America? They've threatened using it as a bargaining chip. So again, fossil fuels, I'm never going to say they're perfect. We don't live in a perfect world, but they are domestic, right? We cannot outsource our oil and gas and coal, no matter how hard we try. I do not trust the Chinese Communist Party with anything over America. Look at what they did with our personal protection equipment and medicines during the coronavirus pandemic, how they've threatened to withhold that as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations. So if we cede our energy to China, we are ceding a lot more than just environmental activism. We are ceding a sense of national security and economic dominance. And I don't trust the communist Chinese with that power over us. I don't trust anybody with that power over us, let alone communist China.
Well, and actually, that's a good point. We saw China use that strategically. You mentioned briefly the dispute they had with Japan, actually. If we go back, when the Chinese Communist Party declared an air defense zone, an ADIZ, over the South China Sea and East China Sea, and they made it so countries had to alert the Chinese authorities if they were traveling through, threatening they'd possibly attack them otherwise, because they claimed they were invading Chinese space. One of the first things they did was claimed ownership over the Diaoyu or Senkaku Islands. The Senkaku Islands are Japanese-owned islands. The Chinese regime claims it has historical ownership over them. When Japan stood up against the CCP, against the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP responded by restricting the sale of rare earth minerals to Japan. And when Japan's entire economy really is based on manufacturing high-tech goods which depend on rare earth minerals, that was a potential death blow to the Japanese economy. The CCP, through its control of rare earth minerals, demonstrated that it can destroy in an instant Japan's whole high-tech economy. And that sent a whole warning shot over the bow of the United States. You might remember in the US, the Obama administration, funny enough, because a lot of people criticize him on this stuff, but they actually did an assessment of what they call supply chain threats with rare earth minerals, including in military equipment. And they found significant threats in military equipment, the US Pentagon, US military equipment, when it came to sourcing from China, even possible parts in US military equipment that came from China which might have been non-functional. Now they started working on dealing with that, but ironically nothing was really done until just very recently under the Trump administration, just a few months back as a matter of fact, have really dealt with laws that try to restrict the use of Chinese elements in our supply chain. As we stand now, the United States with rare earth minerals is trying to build domestic capabilities for that, but it's being held up actually by the Republicans because the contract is going to an Australian company. They're like, okay, why isn't it going to a US company? But this ties into the bigger picture here. The control of key elements at the heart of industry. And who controls industry? Who controls the means of production, right? Which is one of the communist goals, seize the means of production. For the CCP, this is strategy, this is control, and this is influence. And a lot of countries are playing this game. If the CCP controls energy, if they control rare earth minerals, they control manufacturing, they control transportation, they control the global logistics systems. Now what happens then if the US, out of apparent goodwill, stops these things in the US? How do you think China would react to that?
And one quick point, because everything you're saying is spot on. The other reason why we're struggling with rare earth element discoveries here in America is because the very environmental groups that want us to go green prohibit us from finding these natural resources in America. It is mines that are being shut down and picketed, and discoveries in Alaska, California, Nevada, Utah, all across this country. It is those very green groups that demand that we go green that prevent us from getting the raw materials to go green on a domestic platform. And it's so important that these groups are held accountable for their actions. But the second point that you raised is critical. China is trying to dominate the world market on several levels. They're trying it with manufacturing. They're trying green technology. They already have the world market on these rare earth elements. And so if we continue to see, like you said, the means of production to them for solar panels, for wind turbines, I don't see the advantage strategically for America to go green, to make China wealthier, to put more of our green technology needs in their hands. Look, if we're going to go green, quote unquote, then let's find the rare earth elements here in America. Let's manufacture it here in America, and let's build them and implement them here in America. Green technology does not withstand the elements of Mother Earth. Right. So when a hurricane blows through Houston, it's going to do a lot of damage, as we've seen. It's going to tear down wind turbines. It's going to tear up solar farms. Where are we going to get the replacement parts if China doesn't sell them to us, right? When Hurricane Maria went through Puerto Rico, it destroyed every one of their wind turbines, and the island was almost completely dependent upon green technology for its electricity production. Well, the wind turbines didn't withstand the hurricane. A coal-fired plant or a natural gas plant would have withstood the elements, but that's another advantage of fossil fuels, right? So now where do you get the replacement parts? Again, are we going back to China for these things? This is what we will see happen as happened in the Middle East. Suddenly there'll be a skirmish in the South China Sea. We used to have these sudden skirmishes in the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. Well, the location on the earth is going to change. We're going to have sudden skirmishes around China or in the South China Seas, and it's all because China is flexing their muscles, and that's a bad future for America.
Well, you hit on a couple good points here too, which is there's a lifespan to these things, and they're more sensitive to natural disaster. They're more sensitive to the elements than, say, traditional coal or nuclear plants or oil refineries and so on. These things are more susceptible to disasters, and if they break down, how do you replace them? Also, they have lifespans, maybe 10 years or so. There was something pretty shocking that came out. If you remember back again during the Obama administration, when these 5 Chinese hackers with the Unit 61398 of the General Staff Department, 3rd Department, these military hackers everyone was talking about, it's been rearranged now, but that was their unit at the time. When that came out, one of the cases they were charged with, when they faced charges in the U.S. for intellectual property theft, was around stealing green technology from the U.S., particularly wind turbines. And something really shocking came out of that, which is not only did the Chinese Communist Party steal wind turbine designs and technology from the United States, it then gave that to a Chinese company, which then competed with U.S. companies on American soil for taxpayer-funded contracts, and the Chinese company won those contracts. The Chinese company stole our technology, competed with us on U.S. soil against the company they stole the technology from, and won a contract with taxpayer dollars, manufactured in the U.S. Now, how can that possibly happen? That we allow them to compete against our own companies using stuff they stole from us in the first place, and then American taxpayers are the ones who have to pay for it still. It's like we're paying the Chinese Communist Party on 2 different levels, the manufacturing design phase, and then also on the phase of the contracts. I mean, that blew my mind when I saw it. And it really raised the alarm, I think, of what's going to happen if we go full green and China's still allowed to bid on our contracts for green energy, things like this. What are your thoughts on this?
Exactly. And then the problem with the green energy market is that it never has had to compete in the free market, right? It gets tremendous subsidies from the taxpayers. And so no one really knows how it fares in a free market. But China doesn't believe in the free market. So in China's green technology manufacturing for its own domestic use, it is excluded from buying anything but Chinese. So they only buy their own materials. They only buy from their own companies. But then in America, like you said, if we're going to build wind turbines or solar farms, well, we compete in the fair market, and the Chinese will always undercut in terms of price because not only are environmental standards terrible, their labor standards are terrible, right? So if you think of an American company that has to manufacture, they have to pay a fair wage in a free market. They have to pay healthcare costs and FICA. They have to put up with so much OSHA, EPA regulation. They have Greenpeace activists who are chaining themselves to fences that they have to deal with. They have lawyers' fees. So the price just goes up and up and up and up on all of these products they're trying to make. None of that exists in China, right? I mean, Tom Steyer made himself billions of dollars as a coal owner. He owns tremendous amount of coal plants throughout China. Tom Steyer has fought the last decade to shut down coal in America. He's fine with a 9-year-old girl in China working in a coal mine, right? There's no trade association. There's no labor union. There's no OSHA. There's no safety. There's no fair pay. He's fine with that. He makes a lot of money, but he'll be damned if a guy in West Virginia at $45 an hour with a labor union is going to work in a coal mine. So China can always undercut us on the green technology market. So here we are trying to say free markets, free markets. We have to respect the free markets. And our biggest adversary and enemy, China, is ignoring all of these rules and winning at the same time. And you're right, it is egregious that I think this was in Texas, this particular example you're talking about. It is insane that we reward the Chinese by giving them contracts when they are just destroying our economy from within and from without.
Great. I guess just last question here. If you were to leave people with any one message, I mean, a lot of people are really divided on the environmental issue, and I think there's a bit of extreme position on both sides. I know conservatives sometimes they want almost like no regulation whatsoever, no protections. Some of them, not all of them. And whereas the left, they want extreme protections, but they don't take into account the middle ground, that we can have some protections. Yes, you make it so they can't abuse things, so it's unreplaceable and unsustainable over a long term. But also keeping in mind the geopolitical nature of this. That great, go pure green. You're dealing with China, which has no environmental protections, and really the rare earth mining market is one of the most environmental destructive you can have, which is one of the essential parts of this. People don't factor that in as well. If you're to leave people with one message on this, in terms of what it means if China controls the global energy market, what would you tell them?
I would tell them it's a very dark prospect for America if China grows more in their market share and dominates us in terms of energy. Right? Energy goes into absolutely everything we do. The very first thing all of us did this morning when we woke up was probably turn off our alarm, whether it was our smartphone or an old-fashioned alarm clock. But that's electricity right there, right? Our hot shower, our morning coffee, our commute to work, our Zoom call if we're not commuting to work. Energy is in absolutely everything we do. To give up energy to China is like giving up oxygen to China, right? And China is not our friend. So no matter how cheap their prices are, no matter how attractive their offer is, China cannot be trusted on any level, and especially with something as precious and as really life-giving as energy. And so I understand the need for the environmental protection. I want a clean environment, a clean air, clean water. In America, we do that. We have a robust economy. In the last 4 years, we have lowered our carbon emissions more than any other country per capita, and we have increased our oil and gas to our highest level in history. That should not be possible by modern environmental thought, right? They should be mutually exclusive. We can do both in America. We do both. So let's continue to build our economy, have jobs, have prosperity, have a robust economy with all the life-giving products that come from the fossil fuel industry with a healthy environment. And let us not give a drop of that to a country who is our sworn enemy.
Daniel Turner, it's a real pleasure having the Crossroads. Thanks again.
Thank you.